And with that, I'm very excited to welcome the host of Canada Tonight on CBC television, Ginella Massa. Hi. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
You. Is this on?
Yeah. It's
Oh, I can't hear myself. Hi.
So I
So
think
excited to be here. Hi, everyone.
say hi.
Welcome back. It's so nice to be in person after so long. A year and a half of doing like Zoom events.
I know we're a little bit far, but it's still cool that we're like my mask is off.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I think it's really important that you came here today. You didn't have to come here. You've flown in from Toronto. You don't get paid for this. So I wanted to know, why was it important for you to do this gig?
I've always taken as many opportunities as possible. I get a lot of requests for speaking engagements, events. I try to always say yes to students, particularly because coming up in the industry, I didn't see anyone who looked like me that I could look to for advice, as a mentor. You know, I had lots of mentors in the industry and people who wanted to help me out, but they didn't have the same experiences that I did. So I want to be that for people in a way that I didn't have for me. So I try as much as possible to say yes to events for students, young journalists. And I said yes to coming in person because I was just excited to leave Toronto and you know, be in person with lots of young students.
So the very first time that you walked into a newsroom was as an intern, and you noticed something right away. What was it?
Yeah, my first internship was in Toronto, in the largest local newsroom in the country, in the most multicultural city in the world, but it didn't look like it when I walked into the newsroom. I was actually quite shocked by the lack of diversity. I could count the people of color in my hands. I certainly was the only woman in hijab. Actually, the only other person who wore hijab was a lady who worked in the cafeteria in a building of like 3,000.
Did you do the?
Yeah. Actually, after 3 years there, one time I was in the parking lot, and CTV has this massive parking lot, and I'm walking to the building, and I see this woman coming out of the building, and she's wearing hijab, and we make eye contact from far away, and we wave, and we smile, and we hug. Hi, I didn't know you worked here. Oh my goodness, she worked in the IT department. She didn't actually even work in news. But we were so excited to see each other because we hadn't seen anyone in this building who looked like us. So we were very excited.
So how did it impact you to walk into a room like that?
It was intimidating, number one, because it was the first time I really kind of felt like an other, a foreigner. Right? I'd grown up in Toronto in a very diverse school and community, and you know, it wasn't uncommon to see girls in hijab and you know, learn about other religions and cultures. So it was strange for me to enter this newsroom, and also to be in a space where people who I thought would be educated and cultured, and like the questions that they had for me, and like some of the things that they didn't know or understand or thought about Muslims to me was like really shocking. Because I thought, where do you live? You look at this city that you live in, and how do you not know these things? Do you not interact with Muslims? For some people, I think I was the only Muslim person that they personally knew. So I felt also a responsibility. I would get asked lots of questions about, you know, this was a time when the Quebec symbols ban, the first time around that they tried to bring it up, was in the news. There was a lot of stories about the place of religion in schools. There was a school in Toronto that has a high Muslim population, and they were allowing kids to do Friday prayers at lunchtime. And the reason was because kids were leaving at lunchtime to go to Friday prayer and not coming back in the afternoon. And so they're like, well, you can do it here, and then you can go to class. And it became this big thing. And so there were all these stories kind of in the news involving the Muslim community, and so they would turn to me as a resource and ask me questions, and I was like 23, and I was like, oh my God, and I'm like, you know.
You're like the spokesperson for every Muslim person.
For a million Muslims in Canada who all speak different languages, have different backgrounds, come from different socioeconomic communities. Like, I can't represent all of these people. I can only speak to my experience, but I also felt a responsibility, like if I don't, who's here? If I wasn't in this newsroom, what would their coverage look like? What kind of context would they have? So I felt like it was really important to be there and to be that resource. And I think they saw a value in it as well.
So you say that we've spoken before, and you had mentioned how you go from feeling like a token to feeling like a trailblazer, which is what people call you. Can you explain that sort of the wavering between the two?
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting to be in a space in a way that hasn't been seen before, and I feel really proud to be there. It's at the same time, it's sad to be the first in, that it's taken so long, and that I continue to see that the numbers are very small and it's not really reflective of our community. At the same time, there's often times where I feel like, do they actually want my opinion? Do they actually hear what I have to say? Do they actually want to hear the stories that I think are important, or is it just window dressing? Is it just so that we can say, we check the box and we're done?
The window dressing thing is it is a real feeling.
Yeah.
And I just want to acknowledge that, because I have felt that way too, where, for me, I have the name, my face, my skin color, and I think for me, where it becomes difficult is when you do either give your opinion or you give information and it doesn't feel like it's taken. How do you manage that when that happens?
Yeah, I certainly pick my battles every day in every job and every newsroom that I've been in. When I think that something is really important, I'll fight for it. And, when I talk about diversity too, I want to point out, it's not just race, religion, it's also socioeconomics is a big part of it, right? I grew up in an immigrant family, low income, single mother. So, sometimes the stories that I think are important, people in the newsroom who come from affluent families who maybe didn't have those experiences or don't understand them, don't see those stories as important, don't see those people as important. And so for me, especially reporting in Toronto as a local reporter, this is a big part of our society. This is a big part of our viewership. We have a responsibility to report on all parts of our community, right? So for me, I try to push as much as possible to think about some of the people that are not being heard, are not being seen, and be their voice.
Do you have an example of a tussle or like a back and forth that you had with somebody and how that ended up?
Yeah, I mean, I've had quite a few instances where, there were stories about community, stories about low-income communities in Toronto. If anyone knows the Jane and Finch community, it's a lower-income community, and there was a minister who had made comments about Jane and Finch being infested with cockroaches and crack pipes and all this kind of stuff, and it caused a lot of uproar and backlash. And I came into the newsroom that day, I was on the evening shift, and they didn't have a story for me. And I said, oh, well, is anyone doing this story on the minister's comments? And they said, oh, yeah, our political reporter is doing something on the political fallout. And I said, okay, are we getting any comments from people in the community? Are we getting their reaction? Oh, no, she's doing the story on the political fallout. I said, yeah, but maybe we should go there and talk to the people who are being talked about and hear from them. Oh, and it was just like the fact that it hadn't even been thought of and that I was raising it and that it was there was a real reluctance and it was kind of like a begrudging, okay, well, if you want to,
So what
I
happened?
guess. I did go, and I did clip people, and people were incensed and upset and saying exactly the problem was that news outlets were only coming there when there was a shooting. They were only coming there when there was negative stories in the news. And they're like, that's why there's this perception about this community. But look, here you are here on a Tuesday afternoon, and it's thriving, and it's, it's safe, and people are walking around. And yes, we have these problems, but that's not all we are, and we don't want to be defined by that.
And the
right?
story ran?
And the story
Did
ran.
anybody say anything after that?
In terms of?
The story. Did anybody acknowledge the story or its inclusion in the lineup?
In terms of management?
Yeah.
Not really.
What about the people around you?
Not really. We kind of rolled on and kept it rolling. But for me, it was a standout moment that stood out in my mind because I thought, wow, if I hadn't said that, we would have just gone on and done this story without even talking to or about to these people that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And it just rolled on and it went on to another day. But so these moments happen and they really impact people, but often it's not acknowledged. Right?
So to make these statements and to sort of stand up to people, it requires confidence. I would say that journalists, throughout our careers, our confidence goes up and down. It grows, and by the end of your career, hopefully, you're good when it comes to confidence. How have you gained confidence so far in your career?
I fake it a lot. I fake it a lot.
Like I am right now?
Until every moment of every day that I go on air on national TV, I fake it a lot. Because there's no room sometimes to, like, never let them see you sweat. That's kind of my thing.
Ever?
It's like never let them see you sweat. No, I had a rule, like no crying in the newsroom. Cry in your car or in the bathroom. Don't cry in the newsroom. Like, I had to always kind of have this tough exterior. And, you know, comments would be made. I let a lot of things slide. And, you know, I'm always kind of known as like a happy person, very diplomatic. You know, I'm respected. I respect people's opinions. I'm not reactionary, and even when I should be. And so when I do have those moments where I call people out or I say, hey, like, let's have a conversation, or hey, maybe we should think about this differently, people listen because they know that I'm measured. They know that I'm, you know, I'm not someone who just explodes and flies off the handle. But it's tough because then I go home and I get really angry.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think that there's a problem with that, frankly.
Yeah. Honestly, it's survival.
Absolutely, and I get that,
survival.
and I have been there. But isn't it too bad?
Yes.
That that's the way you have to be.
Yes. But for me, it was the only way to survive in an industry that saw me very much as too different, too distracting, just as an other, as an outsider.
You had to do what
I had to do what I had to do, and especially in newsrooms where, you know, you don't ever want to be seen as, oh, she's always playing the race card. Oh, she's so sensitive. Oh, you know, you can't take a joke. Oh. So I was always kind of just, haha, you know, just let things slide, it's okay. And, you know, trying to be palatable and trying to be charming and funny and the first one to crack a joke and, you know, oh, I can, you know, I'm not sensitive and all this kind of stuff to kind of show I'm like you know. But it's a lot of work.
Well, it's essentially assimilation,
essentially, right?
isn't it?
Say that
It's
again?
essentially assimilation of a sort.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, the reality is that I don't feel like my Muslim identity is at odds with my Canadian identity. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, but I have to go out of my way to show that because that's an assumption, right? So I always felt like I had to go out of my way to show that. Now, you know, I'm at a place where I do feel like I speak up more, but always in a respectful way, always in a diplomatic way. Try to call people in more than call them out.
Yeah.
And, you know, using my position and using the fact that I'm in rooms that you know, lots of people who look like me aren't in, and having difficult conversations with people. But it is hard. There's days when I go home and I'm just like raging, like I'm gonna quit or they're gonna fire me. I'm like, which one's gonna happen first, right? Well, in all of my jobs. So.
You talked about like just now you're in a different place. You have more power now. You're now the host of Canada Tonight. How has that changed your experience as a journalist? Like being in a place where you've got more power, you're at the tables where you can say something and something will get done or changed because of you. Like, how are you managing that shift into having more power?
Yeah, I do and I don't, in the sense that I'm still part of a team. I still have managers that I answer to, and I've always been a very collaborative person. So I've never been someone who say this is the way we're going to do it and that's it. And so I always look for consensus, even when I'm, you know, a leader in a team. But if I feel very strongly about something, I'm going to really push for it. And it's different being in a place where, you know, if I have something to say, people are actually listening and people are actually taking it into
kind of like, oh.
I'm like, oh, okay.
I only have to say it once.
Exactly. Well, not just once, but less times.
Okay, twice.
But I'm used to just like saying things and saying them and saying them and saying them again and nothing really happening. So, you know, and that was a big part of why I said yes to this role, was kind of the idea that I would be part of the editorial decision making of the show and the content and you know what we wanted to do. That was really appealing to me, and to not just be the face. That was important to me, to not just be the face of this show, but to also have a say about what is it that we're going to put on the air every night. So yeah, I mean, that's also scary, and that's also a big responsibility. And I have people writing me, why aren't you doing a story on this? Why aren't you doing a story on that?
Do you answer all those emails?
I try sometimes when I can, where I can. Because a lot of people don't understand news or how it works, or what makes a story national worthy, or our show's interview based, so not every story lends well to that. And so I try sometimes, if I can't do the story, to direct them to someone to the right place, or I try my best, and realizing also I can't be everything for everyone. I can't be everything for everyone, and so I probably put the more pressure on myself than anybody else. And having to kind of just let that go a little bit and say, I'm going to do the best that I can. I'm one person.
Well, yeah, you have talked about being a people pleaser, but who now says no. Have you gone from one space to the other?
I learned, kind of early in my career that being nice and saying yes and working hard and being loyal and all these things wasn't actually gaining me respect. It was actually, it can get you to a certain place. No. Yeah.
I said yes to most of my.
Yeah. There was a point, though, where I realized I was just opening the door and allowing people to walk all over me. And I was doing it for people who weren't actually interested in my career growth, who were just interested in getting the most out of me for the least amount of money, right? So it's fine to do all of those things. Yeah, getting me... just working as hard as possible to... the reality is that the media industry is shrinking, and there's not a lot of jobs, and there's not a lot of money anymore, and so they're looking for a way to stretch their bucks, so they're looking to see how much they can get out of you. And so when you're the person who says yes to every shift and yes all the time, and of course, and I'll be there and I'll take that on, they'll keep adding, and realizing though that it wasn't actually serving me, because I wasn't getting these opportunities because they were planning to move me into the next role. It was just so and there are situations where you might be doing that, and there are people who recognize your work, and that's great. But in my particular case, I felt like it wasn't taking me where I wanted to go, and I quit a job without having another job lined up, and that was a big turning point for me. Realizing that this job's not getting me where I want to go. I want to be on air, and I have to bet on myself. I have to take a risk, and it was, of course, a calculated risk in that sense. I was, still living with my parents, and I had a safety net in that sense. But I needed to take control of my own career and not feel like I'm beholden to these people who are going to make me, right? It was like, no, I'm going to make myself. So I have to go after it and go after the jobs that I want and not wait for someone to hand it to me, right? So that was a big turning point for me to quit a job without a plan. Well, I had a plan, but not like I didn't have another job lined up. So I was freelancing for a little bit. Oh, are we sharing? Are we switching?
Just for now. A few months ago, there was a vehicle attack in London, Ontario, and it killed 4 members of a Muslim family, and you reported on it, but you added a little bit more to the conversation. I want to know what it was that you added and what was going on for you and what happened.
I'll go back a little bit, actually, because the day that the news came out of the London attack, I wasn't supposed to be working. I was filling in I got called in early because someone called in sick. And an hour before I was supposed to go on air, we found out there's going to be this police presser, and we're hearing that this hit and run from yesterday is a hate crime, and it was a Muslim family who was killed. So it's so funny because in that moment, my journalism hat went on. I was like, okay, so breaking news mode, who are we going to get? We're going to go full hour, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm just there, right? And I get on air, and all of our guests were Muslim that hour. It was an imam, a woman who worked for a anti-racism group, a local city councilor who was Muslim. And I just thought, wow, I'm in this position where they're just coming to terms with this news. Like, they heard about it half an hour ago, and now they're coming on TV to talk to me about it. They're still processing. And I could tell that for them, there was something kind of comforting about having me be the one interviewing them in that moment. And
were you surprised by the fact that there was a lineup that was all Muslim?
No, I mean, it kind of made sense. The story was a hate crime against a Muslim family. We're going to go wall to wall, full hour.
Okay.
It kind of made sense. This is the community that's that's been impacted by it, so we're going to hear from them. And so even just in those moments when I was interviewing them, you know, they're processing, they're grieving, they're trying to understand it, all of this live on TV, essentially. And I feel thankful that I was the one to be there with them in that moment. And I actually talked with one or two of them afterwards, and they said, thank you so much, it was so great that I got to chat with you, because you get it, and you understand, and you know, you kind of knew what questions to ask. And so I felt really thankful to be there in that moment. And so a couple days later, there was a vigil, and they said, you know, we're going to take this vigil live, and we're going to have you co-host with one of our other anchors in Ottawa. And you know, in these live events, you never really know what's going to happen. It was supposed to be like 5 minutes off the top of us having a chat. We're supposed to interview somebody. We're supposed to go to a reporter, and then go to the event. The interview fell through. The reporter's live source wasn't working, the event was delayed. So now we have like 15 minutes to fill. So we're just chatting, essentially. And we're talking, and you're tap dancing in this situation when you're live. Yeah. You're just trying to fill time, find things to talk about until they go to the next thing. So we're speaking, and David Common asks me, it feels like we've been here before. He says that. It feels like we've been here before. And I said, yeah, it does, actually, He says, yeah, the mosque shooting just happened, 4 years ago? And I said, yeah. And just before his show's Power and Politics, had just been airing some of the ministers and some of the politicians who were in the House of Commons speaking up, calling out, condemning Islamophobia. And I was watching this in the hour before we were on. And I remember just feeling kind of angry. Like, yeah, those are a lot of nice words. Those are a lot of nice words.
Where was your anger coming from? Was it feeling like it was insincere, or was it something else?
Yeah, a little bit of that, right? And so, in that moment, the golden rule of journalism is to keep your opinion to yourself, right? And so I was being very careful about what I wanted, about what I was saying. And so I tried to stick just to the facts and say, these politicians who are coming out to speak about Islamophobia today, they were in this position 4 years ago as well. And some of them actually, in that moment, didn't condemn Islamophobia. They voted against, 97 MPs voted against just a motion, which was non-binding and required no actual action. It was just a statement. And 97 of them voted against it. So, I think it's difficult to hear those words again today, knowing that, nothing's changed. And I said a couple of other things about, being a Muslim and wearing a hijab, and, that there are laws in this country that keep someone who looks like me from being a teacher and a police officer and a judge in Quebec. The leader of the Conservatives voted against M103. And in fact, Justin Trudeau himself also says that Quebec has a right to, while he disagrees with it, they have a right to their own, to make their own choices. So, I'm saying the words are coming out of my mouth, and I think I even said on air, I said, I might get in trouble for saying this, but, that was the reality. And I felt like, as a journalist, it's my job to provide context. So I'm offering context. It's not necessarily about my opinion. All of these things that I'm saying are things that have happened and are things that are true. They are facts. But they're also coming from an emotional place. And I think it's disingenuous for me to sit here and pretend like I'm some impartial observer when these things impact my community and impact me.
Canadians.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so, I knew I was like, I stepped on the line. We'll see what happens.
Were you scared after you finished saying
I
your
was
thing?
scared.
So can you just describe this for me? So you're sitting in your seat, you said the thing, and then you got up, and what happened?
People started texting me. Wow, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I'm emotional thinking about it because
It's okay.
for a lot of people, they have felt like they don't see themselves, they don't hear themselves, they don't hear their community represented or have the platform to. And so I started getting messages, and I thought, well, at least even if I get in trouble, at least this is worth it.
Yeah.
It's worth it for this. It's worth it for this because we're hurting. We were hurting in that moment. And people were like, thank you for saying that. And even after the event, because there were a lot of politicians who came to speak at the event that was supposed to be a memorial for grief and for the community, and there were all these politicians who were using it as an opportunity to campaign, essentially, and that's frustrating, right? So if you want to come to these events to campaign because you want votes, then you need to engage with these communities after the election. You need to engage with these communities afterwards. And so, anyway, I was scared. I thought I was going to get called into the principal's office. Did
the principal call?
I had a like already pre-scheduled meeting with my managers for that week anyway, and I was really nervous going into it. And I think if this had happened 2 years ago, the reaction might have been different. But CBC in particular has spent the last year listening and learning and having a conversation about racialized journalists and what is the role of their lived experiences in our reporting and how do we bring that in an authentic way, and this rule about impartiality,
and objectivity.
How does that impact groups that aren't part of the mainstream or the status quo? And so we had a really good conversation about it. And ultimately, they said, look, this is a big part of why we want you here. And our coverage was better because you were part of it. So, we know there's going to be questions, and we know there's going to be complaints, and there were a couple of ombudsman complaints. But they backed me. They supported me. And that felt really good. That felt really good to feel like there is a shift happening and there's a conversation happening about how do we bring our whole selves to our jobs? And how do we acknowledge that it actually makes us better journalists? And the example that I always use is COVID-19. The idea that the biggest story in the world for journalists right now impacts every journalist who's writing about it. And that doesn't preclude us from being able to report on it, right? In fact, some would say that makes us better equipped. We intimately understand what our readers and our viewers are going through because we're going through it too. And so if we're directly impacted by something, should that mean that we shouldn't be allowed to report on it? I don't think so. And so I think that conversation is starting to be had, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Do you feel like you belong in this industry?
In the newsroom? I feel like an imposter a lot of the times. I feel like an imposter a lot of the times. I've been in rooms where I'm like, first of all, partially because I look around and I'm like, oh, it's like a lot of the same and none of this. And so, no, oftentimes I don't feel like I belong in those places, but I think it's really important for me to be there to bring my perspectives. And so, no, I don't feel like I belong, but at the same time, I feel like I have a job and I have a duty, and that has to be kind of my goal. That's kind of, why am I here, right? This isn't about me. This is about our readers, our viewers, our listeners, our community, the Canadians. It's about them. So that's what I'm here for. Maybe I'll feel a little uncomfortable, maybe I'll feel a little out of place or whatever, but I have a job to do.
I want to talk about David Common's role in that moment. Mm-hmm. So David Common is a white male reporter, and he has been at CBC for a long time. When he made that comment, he said, it feels like we've been here before. It was really interesting because it was just a statement. I'm curious about your perspective on what he said in that moment.
Yeah. It's actually what he said after. because when we came back afterwards, we had a chat on the National, and he echoed a lot of the things that I said. And I thought, wow, it just lands so differently coming out of a white man's mouth.
What do you mean?
Because when it comes from him, it sounds like it's just facts. It's just words. It's just, when it comes from me, it's emotional and it's, it's personal and it's opinion.
So knowing that, how do you feel about David making that statement?
Oh, I'm so glad that he did. Because he was basically echoing my sentiments, but from a objective place, right? As someone who was standing back and looking at what was happening. And so I appreciated that he was essentially saying, yeah, you're right. These are the things that have happened, and it's really sad and disappointing. And so, that's privilege. That's using white privilege to call something out, and because it just lands differently. When it's coming from, when a black person talks about racism, we're complaining. When a white person talks about racism and how it's happening, I think it lands differently.
What is one of your favorite things about being a journalist?
Oh, I love that every day is different. I love that, it's not a 9 to 5. It's definitely not boring. I love the spontaneity of it. I never know what the next day is going to look like. I don't know what I'm actually going back to Toronto. I'm doing the show tonight. I have no idea what's going to be on the show tonight. We'll find out together at 8 o'clock.
You're going to see all the emails.
Yeah, I'm going to see all the emails when I leave here. So that's what's really exciting for me, is that it's never boring. It's always different. It's always new. It's always exciting. And I love meeting new people. And going, especially when I was a local reporter, going to different parts of the city that I otherwise would never go to, or meeting other people that I would otherwise never talk to or cross paths with. That's what's really exciting for me about journalism.
I'm going to invite you to think of a question and put up your hand if you have one, but I'm going to ask a couple.
Yeah.
If you could go back to university and have a do-over of your time as a student, what would you do differently?
I'd probably take political science.
Really?
Yeah, okay, so I have a confession to make. So I studied communications and sociology at York University. I'd study something else.
Okay.
I went to Seneca after, and I did a journalism, broadcast journalism diploma. But when I was in university, I hated politics. I hated politics. My sister was studying international relations and political science, and I would always say to her, oh, God, you make everything is about politics with you. She was always at a protest. She was always at a rally. She was involved in the student union, and I was just like, oh, I can't be bothered. I thought I was going to host a lifestyle show or like a talk show or something more like that. I hated politics. And then, I got into my first internship and I started working in the newsroom and actually realized that politics impacts everything. Mm-hmm. Everything is political. and also that, the sort of the hard news that I was kind of running away from, they were just stories. It was storytelling. And so I really kind of fell in love with news in that way, and wished that I had gotten better versed at politics, because now I'm kind of learning on the fly. We have an election coming up, so yeah.
You have a lot of learning to do?
I have a lot of learning
Nice.
to do.
We have some questions from the Zoom. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question for folks who are listening. Was as much of a trailblazer as I am, does it get tiring talking about being the first hijab-wearing journalist, and do I ever want to wish I could just be referred to as a journalist? Absolutely. I wish I didn't have to talk about diversity and racism and Islamophobia and all this stuff, and I could just talk about journalism. I look forward to that day, but we're not there yet, and especially being one of the only here, it falls on me to have that conversation. So I will have it until we don't need to have it anymore. But yeah, I look forward to talking about lots of different stuff, because I'm interested in lots of different things.
Okay, I'm conscious of our time.
No worries.
If you're, what advice do you have for a white student or a white journalist or a person who's part of another dominant group, like not having a disability or being financially stable, and you care about this stuff and you want to support your peers, but you're afraid of making a mistake when you talk to people or do stories about underrepresented people?
You know, I think that touched on a really important thing, and that's recognizing your privilege. I have privilege. I have privilege because I'm university educated. I have privilege because my name is ambiguous. I have privilege because I speak perfect English. All of these things have helped me be where I am, right? Even though I wear hijab and I'm a woman of color. And so recognizing my privilege and how do I use that to help other people or to speak for other folks. So I know lots of people who are like, I have an accent and I have a hard time, you know, in the broadcast industry because no one wants to give me a job because I have a, you know, an accent or my name is whatever, right? So how can I speak up for those people? How can I be there for them? I think someone, do you know B. Kwame?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so she's a writer, and she wrote actually recently in Chatelaine about resilience and having to be resilient. And someone asked her this question, and I really love the answer she gave. She said, stand in the gap for people so that they don't have to be the ones, as this person asked, I have to be the one always talking about diversity and racism and Islamophobia. Stand in the gap for people so they don't have to be the ones always talking about it.
So more David Common kind of behavior.
Exactly. Like that is kind of what being an ally, and I actually really hate that word ally, because it sounds like it's my problem that you're helping me with. Racism is my problem, and you as a white person, you're gonna help me with it, right? So how do you take that on as it's your problem too, right? It's your problem that you're gonna deal with and help, and not just help with, but you're actually gonna confront. So I like that she said stand in the gap for people so that they don't have to be the ones constantly swatting away all of this.
I'm getting eyes here.
I'm not chasing you off. I was just going to say, if people have questions, we don't have a microphone moving around. So
Oh, I
to,
see.
They'll have to shout the question.
Use your broadcast voice.
We have one person over here. Please yell.
Yeah. She's a fourth-year student, and she grew up in Jane and Finch, and she's asked what advice for racialized students going into the newsroom. I would say don't be afraid to be yourself. Don't be afraid to bring your story ideas. Don't be afraid to bring your experiences and your stories. And, you know, the way that I think about it, too, is like, this is, when I would pitch a story that maybe my producers would be like, I don't know, whatever, I would say, this is a story that, you know, people in my community are talking about. This is a story that they really care about. There is a group of people that this really matters to.
And that's a good way to pitch it, yeah.
Yeah, it may not be in your circle or in your realm. It may not be on your radar, but this is something that's really in the conversations in my family and friends' WhatsApp groups, right? So letting them know that it is something important, maybe not to you or not to the people around you, but there is a big group of people that care about this. Because at the end of the day, it's down to clicks, it's down to views, it's down to numbers, right? And so kind of making the business case for some of the stories that you think are worthwhile. Don't be afraid to pitch those stories and keep pitching. Don't get defeated. Keep pitching them, even if they say no. Keep pitching them. Eventually, you'll wear them down.
We've got some from the Zoom. A question from the Zoom?
I think a big part of it is there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of meeting people where they are. Recognizing that young people don't get their news at 6 o'clock by turning on the TV, right? They get it online, they get it mostly online, pretty much, right? And so often, you know, as these journalistic institutions, we scoff at, you know, the way the digital medium has changed and the way that information is shared, and we turn our noses up at it. instead of actually engaging with it and meeting people where they are and recognizing this is where people are getting their news. So how do we get there? And so I think that that's a big part of why trust is eroded. And going back to even what I was saying before about the stories that are blowing up on Twitter or TikTok or Facebook or wherever, and mainstream media isn't touching it or hasn't done a story or aren't even aware or know that it's going on. But there, as I said, there's a conversation happening somewhere else about this story. So I think we have to be more in touch and in tune with where people are, where they're having conversations, what are the conversations that we're having, and we have to be there. We're quite behind in broadcast media and traditional media.
What's the most common question you get from students, and how do you answer it?
Oh, how do I get a job? Do you have a job for me? How do I come work at CBC?
It's a smart question. It's a smart question.
And I say, I have no idea. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people want to, what's the best way to get my foot in the door? I always used to tell people, like, think about what your dream job is and do your internship or your co-op there. Because that's the best way to get in is through your internship. So if you have a dream publication or place that you want to work, go apply for your internship there. Because once you're in, it makes it easier for you. It's easy to turn an internship into casual freelance shifts, and that usually turns into some sort of long-term work. So that's my advice.
We have a question here.
It's hard to say at CBC because I started in November during a pandemic.
I can say it is. Here's my experience. I was on the Toronto local on the floor, like doing my show, Fresh Air, and I was the only black person. And then I think this was maybe 2017, and then 2018, 2019, I was like, oh. And it was like either a black person or a more racialized person. The same thing happened at CBC Music. There were more racialized people. And there are definitely efforts going on. The big question, I think, is about how you support the racialized people when they're coming in. It's really not just about getting the numbers. It's about making sure that they belong, or at least feel like they belong to some degree once they're there. Do you want to take a selfie now?
Okay, yes, let's
Can
do
we
it.
do that? Are you into it? Or do we have one more question? All right, all right. One more question. Go ahead.
Yes. Okay, good. You said it was an easy one.
I know.
Where is journalism going? What's the future of journalism? I wish I had a crystal ball because I'd like to have a job in 5 years. Because journalism is changing, and a big part of it is because of, cable news is dying, and cable TV is dying, and everything, people want things now. They want them right now. When they open their phone, they want it there. And, we have to stop pretending like people are going to wait for tomorrow's newspaper or this evening's newscast. And so that's something that I'm really trying to push for in my newsroom is, to really be forward thinking and to not be reactionary. That's a struggle. So, yeah, I don't know where news is going, but I hope that we're going to be able to not just catch up, but get ahead of it. I hope so. It's, our industry is we have to if we want to survive.